Hey guys, I'm AH Designs and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So I have been working on a brand new cosplay of Toon Zelda from The Legend of Zelda, Wind Waker, Spirit Tracks, and a few of the other games where they reuse the same design. You can actually see a little bit of the dress behind me, but we're not here to talk about the dress today. My sewing machine has recently been not working, so I've been jumping around the cosplay a little bit. I have no idea what order this will come out. That video about the dress might already be out. This one might be coming out first. I don't know at this point because of the state of my missing sewing machine. But I have decided to move on to the tabard, the front piece on her dress, because I'm not just sewing it plainly. I've done a lot of applique and satin stitch in my cosplay years, so I wanted to try something completely brand new on it, something new to me at least. I am using Goldwork thread. So Goldwork is a type of embroidery that honestly it's gotten really popular in the cosplay community, and for good reason, because it's really fancy, it's really pretty, and it has a lot of historical backing, which makes it very interesting to incorporate into costumes and creates really gorgeous and elegant texture, which I feel works really well with a princess character. I've also seen a lot of people working on Zelda cosplays and putting Goldwork onto her tabard because a tabard is a decorative piece on the costume, on their outfit, and that is meant for signifying wealth and symbolism, and historically and in royal imagery, Goldwork embroidery is used for that kind of thing, so it feels really perfect. So there's a lot of creators I'm inspired by here, one of which is Pinamu. I think that's how I pronounce her name. I might have said it wrong. She was on Team Finland for the World Cosplay Summit 2023 when Megwin and I were there, and she's really inspired me in this process, so she's made me really want to try this, so I'm jumping in and I'm really enjoying it so far. So in order to discuss how I'm doing this, first I need to talk about how I actually got to the point of like the pattern for creating this. I think well over a year ago now, my friend Valky Designs, who is another Canadian cosplayer, sent me some files that were like blueprints that she created of Toon Zelda. She's done this for a few of the different Zeldas just to make the process of like copying out the shapes of the tabard easier. So I recently got that printed out. This is it here, full of markings and stuff because I've been using it. But this is the tabard piece that she gave me, and I printed it out to scale. But when I put it onto my dress, I did discover that it would be a little bit too big on the scale of me as a human being. So I did scale it down a little bit. And this is my trace off of the scale down. I just brought it in a little bit on the sides, and then I just resized some of the shapes. The Triforce is still the same shape. These guys are a little bit smaller, and this is not quite as wide. But all in all, it's still the same tabard. I'm very thankful to Valky Designs for sending me this pattern to really streamline this part of the process. So now I've gotten on to the Goldwork. Now, I have some started right here. You can see that some of my threads are on here. I have it on this frame. I'm using leftover silk dupioni, again, from my Snow White cosplay, because I still have quite a lot, and the color is gorgeous, especially against the tones here. So I'm really excited about it, and I have tried it out. Again, this is my first time doing this technique, so I wanted to try it out a little bit off camera before I like started to show you guys the process, because I wanted to do a bit of learning off camera. So within Goldwork techniques, I actually just received this book in the mail earlier today. Thank gosh, it's finally here. Within this technique, there are multiple techniques. So I am going to only be doing a technique called couching, which is laying threads down and stitching them down by hand. Goldwork is all usually done by hand for very good reason, and I'm using two different types of threads. So the first one I'm using is on most of the outline pieces, and this is called Pearl, and it's essentially a big spiral. So when you pull on it a little bit gently, there's room and your threads just kind of fall in between the stitches, which I think is really fun. You just kind of watch them disappear into the fabric, into the spiral. And then I'm using a Japanese thread, which is a cotton thread that has the metal shininess like wrapped around it like a little film. And these are also couched down, but these ones you see the stitches on top, and you usually do them in 2x2s. I have been following many tutorials and all sorts of YouTube videos in order to learn how to do this, and I'm really enjoying it. What I'm basically doing, and I'm gonna probably do a lot of voiceovers for this video after I show you a bit more of the process, because I'll want to talk more about how it went as opposed to what I'm doing, because this is going to be a very long process. I can already tell you that circle took me about 6 hours, that little teardrop. 6 hours, almost-ish, maybe 5.5. It's a lot of time. Of course, it's my first one. It's going to speed up as I go, but it takes a lot of time So it's going to be a lot of the same thing, maybe with a little bit of twists here and there just to kind of make it a bit more interesting, but it takes a lot of time. I'm really enjoying this. I have multiple beverages going, but the way I'm basically doing it is I start with the pearl because the pearl is bigger and it's more raised. So essentially I go around my shape and I start to like just tack them down. I use some of my tools I have around and all by hand to lay it down on the shape that I've drawn down. I used a tracing paper in order to get it on there, and then I refined it with chalk. And then I use the pearl and stitch it down on top, creating the outline. And then I decide where I want to lay down the other threads. The pearl is cool in the sense that it doesn't have like a raw edge that frays or anything because it's only metal. So you can have blunt edges butting up against each other to close off the shape. Compared to the other thread, the Japanese thread, which you have to plunge underneath. So they work quite differently. There's definitely different systems to kind of manipulate both around, but it's been a really fun learning experience, and I cannot wait to show you more of this process as I work on it. So let's go. Let's take a look as I work on this part of the process. And yeah, I'm really excited to work on this. I'll let you know how many hours it took in the end.
Part of my experience in doing this was that I wanted to experiment with how playing around with the different directions of the threads would kind of create different textures and effects. So on these wings, I decided to do each wing separately and on their own, just to kind of see how that worked. And I actually really liked the end result, because basically I was just using really long threads and kind of going from there. This is a lot faster than, say, doing plunging every single row or something like that. It's one continuous line that kind of pulls in onto each other, but it creates really interesting dynamics, different textures along the corners, and creates some really interesting directional, like pulls kind of thing. You'll kind of see it later on where it makes each wing look like a separate piece that blends really well into the directions I ended up going with for the body of the wing, as opposed to each separate like feather. For the body, I made the threads zigzag up and down and then turn the corners at the top and the bottoms as opposed to going all around the piece, and that created a really neat effect. And finally, you can actually see here how it ends up looking on the underside. Because I'm using a continuous thread, you only have a few spots where the threads are plunged underneath the fabric. So I have to stitch down those each and every time, so when you plunge it, while the effect is different, the underside gets more threads, and when you do a continuous thread, there's a lot less. I also love the way all the stitches look on the underside. It creates this really neat, like, directional pattern.
I have now been working on this for a little while, about 50 hours maybe. I haven't done the calculations yet. 50 hours in. I have this part done, which it sounds like a lot, but this has been really, really lovely to do. And I'm having a lot of fun playing around with directions, because depending on the direction you put everything, the texture looks different. So for example, because of the direction I did all of this, it makes it look like this continues into here, like a wing. I really enjoy that a lot. So I've been really, really enjoying this. I apologize that some of my footage, it was too overhead, so my head gets into some of the footage, so I will rectify that for the rest of the process. But I love this so much. I love the lines it creates. I love the texture. It is shinier. Like this is so much cooler than if I had applicated or something. Like I love this. The next thing to do are the little circles. So they're kind of faded a little bit, but you can kind of see them. So there's these two little circles, and with circles, oftentimes you do it in a little spiral. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. So just like the other one, I'm going to do the pearl around the edge, and then I'm going to start from the outside and slowly make my way and spiral inwards into the very center of or the other way around. I'll take a look at my Goldwork book to see exactly how they recommend starting. But yeah, that's where I'm at next. I don't think they're gonna take me anywhere near as long as up here. And I'm feeling really good about it. I'm having a great time on this.
I really love the way that spiraling into the circle ends up looking on the final piece. Again, playing around with those directions, it was kind of interesting to see how it would end up looking, and gives it a really interesting and kind of fun texture that I played around with later on in the piece as well. Reaching the center was so satisfying, but also so tricky because there was so little space, and the threads can only turn and pull and bend so much. But when he finally got it plunged down the center, it made for such a satisfying little shape. Now on to what was one of my favorite parts of the entire piece, and that is the Triforce. Now I only need Pearl in the red color, as the gold was all going to be encased inside that red border. So I didn't use any gold Pearl on this piece, just the red to outline the red outline. It went really smoothly and was super satisfying to do. And before I was talking a little bit about how sometimes I was experimenting with different directions and plunging versus going around a piece. So for each and every little strand of this thread, I was plunging it into the ends. You can kind of see where they begin and end in this shot here a little bit. So I was filling in those spaces. So it took quite a while because I was plunging each and every one and would have to attach those underneath the piece afterwards to keep them nice and secure. It ended up looking very satisfying, but takes a lot more time. But I really liked using this red thread. This had a slightly different texture than the white, and so did the gold that I found a little easier to hit corners with and stuff later on. Now, one of my reasons for plunging in all the threads on the border itself was because I felt that would transition into the continuous line that I was going to do on the little pointy ends of the border. I'm really glad I did this because it made these pointy ends have a lot more dimension, and with certain light it makes them look a little bit more 3D, which is one of my favorite effects of this whole technique. I really love how the different shapes kind of like build up as you build up and fill in the colors. I think it's really, really neat. And honestly, the entire red and gold section of the tabard was probably my favorite part of the entire piece. Now for what was my absolute favorite part, filling in the triangles. I discovered with this technique that my favorite shape to fill in is definitely triangles, because it's straight lines and then these really, really neat and even corners. It's so satisfying to do, compared especially to a circle and such. This was so satisfying, and like the red thread, the gold was bending at the corners really, really well, even better than the white was. At first I thought it was just because I was getting better at the technique, but it was actually the threads being slightly different and easier to bend. But the way that this built up to make almost that 3D effect, just like on the little ends there, oh my gosh, I love it. So I'm really happy with how they look, but they were just so satisfying to hit those corners and hit those straight lines. It was immensely satisfying to do. Of course, the hardest part, or the trickiest part, was definitely getting into the center, because unlike the circle, at this point I'm trying to keep those lines as straight as possible to create that cornered effect that you can kind of see building up. So you want it to be sharp corners for as long as possible until you hit that center, and then you're just trying to fill in the space. It was satisfying, it was tricky. I am so glad I had 3 triangles to do, because yeah, this was definitely one of my favorite things, and if I ever need to do triangles on gold work like this again, I will be down for it so quickly. Perhaps I need to make more costumes with Triforces alone, because honestly, they are so satisfying to make with this technique. So I definitely need to do more Zelda cosplays, I think, that require a tabard with fancy embroidery. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Once my delightful Triforce was finished, I actually had to remove the piece from the frame because I was now running out of space and had to move the piece up in order to move on to the next piece. But before I could do that, you can kind of notice that because of all the handwork I had been doing, I had rubbed off my chalk markings of the other patterns on this tabard. So I had to get my tracing paper and then the pattern that I had originally made and retrace the shapes on, lining everything up, which was so tricky, but once I got it, it was all good to go. Now, like the top of the pattern, the bottom was pearled with a border of silver, and then the inside I'd be filling it with the white smaller threads. Now, I decided this time, instead of going piece by piece, that I would just pearl all the pieces at once, which I actually found really satisfying, and I kind of wish I did that with the earlier pieces. But either way, really glad I did it this way, and this was the point where I could really kind of see the piece coming together, because now every symbol on the whole entire tabard now was like permanently in place. It wasn't just a chalk marking, it was there, it was tangible, and you could really see it coming together at this point. And yay, more triangles! Though this one was a lot trickier because that bottom corner was really hard to do because this is not an equilateral triangle like the one that was on the Triforce.
Okay, so time for another check-in because I've actually been gone for about a week. My fiance and I were gone to Dominican for a week with his parents, and I'm back now, so I haven't touched the tabard in about a week, but I'll show you where I left it or how I left it. I have the frame over there, my little mess of the table right now as I work on this. Here is how it stands right now. I am so happy with this that when I took it off the frame, it was my first time seeing like with every piece being visible in some form of gold work. Some of them are of course only in pearl, but like you can see the vision now. So this is where I left it, and I was thinking about it all week. So I'm going to put it back on the frame. This will get all scrungly again. It kind of gets all like scrunchy. Luckily, laying it out like this for a week, it got nice and flat again. I also do have a mini iron that's like this big, so I can get into all these areas and like press it down a bit, but my precious. I left it for a week, and now I'm going to get back onto it. But yeah,
I'm so happy with it. This part especially, like the Triforce, oh my god. I'm gonna go put this back on the frame and put my camera back onto its holder, and we're gonna keep working. I'm getting excited because we're getting closing in on the final hours. I believe I'm over 80 hours into this part of the project alone, just on the embroidery. So yeah, it's going well and I'm really liking it. So let's keep trekking. I'm very excited to get back onto it because I love it so much. So these little fish shapes that I'm calling them, because they do kind of resemble fish with fins, what I did was basically fill in the circle to make a spirally shape, and then I would build out the different sides. So I'd do the outside and the inside and slowly make my way into the center. And each and every strand was plunged on either end. So this was not a continuous shape like I did on the wings or the teardrop. I really like the effect that this made, and it looks very different from the wings above, but I really like the way that this filled in, how clean it looked. Honestly, it was a lot of work because the plunging does take a lot more time, but it was really cool to watch the piece slowly fill in and see where they would eventually meet in the middle to create new little gaps that I then had to fill in some more. I had some predictions on how the texture and the different strands would end up looking, but I am really happy with this. If I were to do a few things differently, I would probably have started the strands from inside the circle and not made the circle separate, but I do like how it makes it look like a separate piece as if it is like the head of a fish. I am also glad that I did all the fins separately from the main body, because that ended up looking like a really cool effect as well. I really love the texture and playing around with directions with this technique. There's so much you can do with it, even though it doesn't seem like there is a lot. I also just really enjoy couching. This entire thing was incredibly enjoyable to do. I really love how in these shots here, you can really see where certain gaps were closing, and then you could see smaller shapes building in that I would slowly have to fill in. I think that was really cool, and again, created some really neat effects on the final shapes. I'm so happy with these, even though these shapes were clearly the parts that took the longest of the entire piece, arguably.
Okay, so I did a whole check-in the other day about how I was going to finish the tabard, and that didn't end up happening because I needed to cut 3-inch wide bias tape to finish this thing off. So I'm refilming that now that I actually have the materials to do so. So the tabard is now at a point where it is finished. I am so ridiculously happy with this, like you don't even know. I love it so much. Off camera, I have gone and put the lining side on the other side, and I've added a zipper to the back. Now, this was another genius suggestion by Austin Larkham, where you add a zipper to the back of your tabard so that if you ever need to go in and fix it, like say something comes loose, something like that, you can go in and fix it without completely taking the tabard apart, which the more you don't take it apart, the more likely it is to stay intact. So this is the zipper is in the long run. Hopefully I'll never even have to touch it or use it, but it's there for longevity of the piece. It's there to keep it safe. It's there so that if something needs to be fixed, it can be fixed easily and without damaging more of it or damaging some of the other elements. So off camera, I went and did the zipper. I would unzip it right now, but there's lines all over it because I've gone and hand basted it nice and flat and together. Now, most people, when they think of linings, they think about the pillowcase method where you put good side to good side, go around the edge, open up the top. That's not the kind of lining I'm doing here because to pull this inside out with all of this on it is not the best idea because I'd have to be like pulling it, it'll get all scrungly. Not the best idea. So it's kind of just like flat lined, and that's where the bias tape I had mentioned comes in. And when I ordered this, I didn't know what the satin looked like, and ordering satin online can be a risky game because you might get like a really nice one, or you might get one that kind of looks like a costume satin or something a little bit in between. Even if it's a more expensive satin, like the price wise, sometimes you can get it and it still feels cheap, which is unfortunate, but I actually got a pretty decent one, honestly. So what I'm going to do is panic a little bit and cut around the lines I've marked on this piece, because I do have these basting lines. This is where I'm planning to have the bias tape end, and that is the finished edge. So I'm going to cut around pieces as they're together very carefully. I'm going to roll over the tops here and just quickly machine stitch them shut with probably a little top stitch. This area will not be seen on the costume, so I don't mind that being machine stitched. And then I'm going to start to apply the bias tape. I will be cutting this fabric into bias tape strips, and that is going to be 3 inches wide because I have 3/4 of an inch of, and then by machine, I will be applying the outside fabric, so on the good side of the tabard, using my machine, carefully following those little lines and mitering the edges, because mitering with bias tape is very satisfying, very nice, but also like it just makes the edges look so much more crisp. So we're gonna miter those edges, and then I'm gonna bring it over, press it on my iron, and I'm gonna hand stitch it down on the opposite side, which should keep it all nice and clean. No top stitching on the bias tape required, so I have good control over everything, how it's behaving. The bias tape will be the final step of all of this, and then this piece will be finished. 139 hours worth of gold work alone. That doesn't include any of the other work on this, plus the other work to make it into a finished piece, and it will be finished. Okay, so I'm now at a point where the tabard is complete. I have the bias all attached, all the gold work's done, and the zipper's applied in the back. I have all of the threads now pulled off, and I have some attachments onto the dress. So it's attached with some hooks and also a snap, which keeps it from going up off the hooks, to keeping it all in place, and it's attached to the actual dress. So I could actually, in theory, and I have actually done it to try it on, I could put this all on in one like fell swoop without even like taking anything off. Like all the pieces could be attached, I can put the dress on. Not how I'm ideally going to put it on, but I can. Now, this obviously, it's a very small piece of the costume in the end of things. Like, in the grand scheme of the dress, it is just one decorative piece. But I am so happy with this piece, like you wouldn't believe. First of all, from afar it looks great, but up close there's a lot of like textures and stuff going on, and it brings this design to life. And it was so much fun for me to learn how to do these techniques like this, learning gold work, learning different ways of doing this type of gold work and couching and everything like that. And I can really tell the difference from when I started to the end. You can see the progression of me slowly getting better at this technique as I was working on it. So I think that's a really lovely part of this costume. You can tell that this is made by hand, but in a good way. In the way that I enjoy on a costume piece. Like, I'm hoping when I wear this to conventions, people can like really appreciate like the love that I put into it. That is my goal with this costume, especially because this costume is an absolute like indulgent labor of love for me. So I'm so happy with this piece. I know that in this video is probably very repetitive because it's a lot of similar footage of me couching down threads for 139 hours. That's what I added it up to. And probably even more if I didn't calculate things properly, because I wasn't like timing myself. So was this worth doing? Absolutely. I can honestly tell you that since I've finished this piece, my hands have been itching for another hand sewing project. I loved doing this. I am insanely proud of it. I'm very proud that this is like a decorative piece that's front and center on this costume. So when I wear it, it's like one of the first things people will really see. So be sure to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff, because the next video will be about the accessories part of the costume. So the chest plate, the belt, and the headwear. So I'm really excited to get to those things as well and finally finish off Toon Zelda. And I hope you also have been enjoying the process of going through this with me, because this has been a really cool adventure. And I was having some really nice feedback over on my Instagram stories as I was working on this. So thank you all so much, and let's keep going on Toon Zelda.